I think what happens to players now, and Kyrie falls into this category at times, they just say too much. Like no one says that you have to bare your soul to the media.
The Ringer NBA show presented by Heineken. From your vantage point as a former player, why is there such a contentious relationship between players and the media? Like, why do you think that is?
I don't think every player has a contentious media relationship, or relationship with the media. I don't believe that to be true. But I think there was when I played, we didn't have nearly the voice that the players today have. Like, we didn't have our own pods. We didn't have these social media accounts that had millions of followers for the most part. So we couldn't really get our message out. And at times it is frustrating and almost feels helpless when you're a player and the only narrative that can be put out there is that of the journalist or the club, right? Because said journalist might be a beat writer, and no matter what you do in some instances, like that's just what the narrative is going to be, right? So I think, if you don't foster sound relationships with the media, then that can be the case, especially when I played, because you didn't have these outlets to have your voice heard. It was only coming from the media. So I think it kind of, stems from like that type of relationship. But what I'll say to the relationship in general, and especially as it pertains to like Kyrie and today, is like, as long as you were a good dude and you stood up and you did your media responsibility and you weren't disrespectful for the media, for the most part, those guys were fair. Now, they might not always write a glowing review of what you did, but you might not have deserved a glowing review of what you did. There's always an asshole. Like, there's always an asshole, a guy who writes shit that no matter what you do or how nice you are to him, he's going to write negative shit. He might not, everyone has their own taste of player. And not everyone, Logan, can be impartial when writing, right? Like, I've seen that on multiple teams and multiple markets. But as long as you fostered good relationships, you did your job, you stood up, you answered questions. You could even have a bad night and say something like snarky, and most dudes would give you the benefit of the doubt because they know that you are, in the heat of the battle and so on and so forth. I think what happens to players now, and Kyrie falls into this category at times, they just say too much. Like, no one says that you have to bare your soul to the media. No one says that you have to tell them everything that's on your mind. Because if you give a media member something good, in terms of a nugget of information that's going to be inflammatory or something like that, I mean, that's their job. In a lot of, you're trying to get the clicks. You're trying to be the guy who can break the story. So, you better believe they're going to do it. I don't hold that against them. I hold it against whoever it is that opened their mouth and said something that they wouldn't want written, in every publication across the world. And so I would say to these guys, like, you could still do your job and get up in front of the media. No one says you have to bare your soul every time someone asks you a question.
So you said something that was really interesting about narrative, right? About a narrative that can get put on you. How does that happen? And how did you get a narrative? I feel like you got a narrative put on you. What is the feeling like that from a player's perspective? And how do you break that, if at all? And is it fair that we put that on you?
Well, again, I mean, I've had good narratives. Like when I was in Philly in 2001, and I kind of captured lightning in a bottle in that little bit of limited time in the finals. Like, the narrative around me was really good. I mean, I wasn't ready to really contribute, heavily on an NBA team, but I had played well in that short window of time, and the narrative around me was good, right? Like, so it was cool. Like, my narrative in Phoenix was really good. I was hardworking, part of what they were doing there, and I was really cool with all the media guys. But the narrative around me, the flip side of that was the narrative that transpired in Utah towards the end of my career, and I talk about it a lot. Even though I was good with all the journalists out there, and Brian Smith and all the people that worked at Salt Lake Trib and all of that, Gordon Munson, I think his name was. Like, I had done a lot of work with them, always gave an interview, was always forthright, never rude to anyone. Utah is the Jazz, and the Jazz is Utah, right? And so no matter what transpired in that like, season, the narrative was going to be what they wanted the narrative to be. You understand what I'm saying? And so that was super frustrating for me, because I got a lot of hate from Jazz fans for a long time, for a situation that they were only getting one side of, right? And like all I was asking, like if you hear my side of it and you still want to hate me, cool, like no problem. But if you never hear my side and I can never get it out, like that sucks. And that's just, you couldn't control that at the time. Now, Logan, I would say, like, if you are asking me a question, I'd be very guarded about my response. I'd give you what I want you to know as a journalist. That way you can't write anything else. Anything else would just be opinion. It wouldn't be factually based, and it would just be purely opinion pieces. And then I would also use my social media accounts or my platform if I had a pod to get my narrative out there. And I wouldn't be condescending and demeaning to the media. That's counterproductive because, again, it's a relationship business.
This is something I want to ask you as a player. What do you look for in a journalist in terms of like fairness, in terms of like, because I know players pay attention to us. Like you guys act like you don't, but I know I see you guys pay attention to the journalists that are working hard, that are trying, right? At least for the most part. But what do you look for in a journalist or someone that is covering you? Who gets the more respect in your book?
Let's see, man. For local journalists, I always appreciated somebody who, asked me questions and had the relationship like you described before, where they would come to me and talk, and they weren't asking me for anything, right? Like I've had plenty of conversations with a Paul Coro in Phoenix, or a Brian Smith in Utah, and different places where we're having conversations about what my kids are doing and stuff like that. Like they're not asking me for anything. There's no nugget that they're trying to, unearth in the conversation that we're having. You know what I mean? And then like I always thought that went a long way for the trust building. And then, I'm not stupid. So when you're asking me questions, I always appreciated someone who's asking me straightforward questions. Like you're not trying to, mask anything. There's no hidden agenda in what you're asking. And then thirdly, like I know what I said to you. So like if I gave you a bunch of information to one point and you chose to use like one thing I said to another point to illustrate your point, like then I know who you are, right? Like because you didn't really characterize like our conversation the right way. Like you mischaracterized the tenor of our conversation, right? So like those, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's kind of how I figured out like who I like to be around and who I didn't.
And not, so I think you're saying like not somebody that just comes around for the scrums or whatever, right? Like that just comes around. You don't really know them like that, but they do come in, tap in with you before the game, or maybe tap in with you after. See, like, yo, man, how's the family doing? And da, right? Like,
no
just at least understand you.
No doubt. But no, everyone else in that scrum that you just described has a job to do. So when you get up in front of me, like, and I'm getting like I got my clothes on and I'm standing up to do my interview, I will certainly answer everyone's questions, but I'm not going to be as forthright. This takes me back to what I'm saying about Kyrie. Like, I'll give you honest answers about what happened in the game, but I might not bear to you like exactly what's on my mind because I don't know what you're going to do with that. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like,
For sure.
The relationship guys are who I would give a little bit more to because I trust that you know me. You know that even if I say something like derogatory in the midst of all kind of glowing shit, that I would, for the most part, am happy about what's taking place, and you're not just going to print the one thing I said negative.